Perfect. Looks like we're
Hello and welcome to Dr. Anglin's Have a Laugh, Walt Disney's Kansas City Legacy. I'll get out of your way here because I want to get right to our main event. So with that said, Dr. Anglin, take it away.
all right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be doing this presentation. I want to say hello to everybody who's going through the live streaming. So everyone on Facebook, on Twitch, on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming. I hope everyone's having a great time at the festival. Thank you to all the leaders, Professor Nyquist, Professor Finch, Professor Stover, and of course, all the students and the hard work they've put in, both present, Frankie, and I see Delaney there, and in the past to help bring this, I see Daria. So wonderful to be here. All right, so let's get started and talk about Walt Disney and his time in Kansas City and how it helped to go and make him who he became. All right, let me close that there. So yes, so wonderful to do this workshop. I'll be talking about Walt Disney and his Kansas City legacy and how so much of the person that he became started in that city of fountains that is not too far from us, and we're really in kind of that metropolitan area. Before we talk about Walt, though, I'd like to paraphrase a little bit, and that we've sort of done our introductions, we've taken care of business. Let's talk a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Anglin. I'll be your guide during this magical journey into Walt Disney's Kansas City legacy. And it's the perfect job for me because I love Disney. And that's adapted from the script to the Great Movie Ride. Anybody who's been on that might know that's familiar. So why I'm doing this kind of presentation, since my early childhood, being really young, of course, at my grandmother's house and watching DuckTales and Tailspin and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, all the Disney afternoon. Of course, my love for Disney started, and old VHS tapes. But really solidifying what this legacy meant was during my second trip to the Walt Disney World Resort. From there, I had just this unwavering kind of passion for everything Disney. So much so that I actually went to work for Walt Disney World Resort. I was, as they call them, cast members for a number of years. Was in various roles in a number of different areas. So I started out with an internship and then a little bit of full-time and seasonal work in hotel operations, Disney's Wilderness Lodge and Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground and Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge. I also did internship recruitment for the Disney College Program, and my final role was in marketing and sales strategy for Disney youth programs, the ESPN Wide World of Sports, and Run Disney. As an academic, I currently teach a course on the impact of the Walt Disney Company on society. And that started out just as a trip when I was at the University of Tennessee, but then became a full class here at Washburn. And it includes a trip to the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. And you can see some of the students who were on that very first trip in that class in the summer of 2019. But enough about me. We're here to talk about Walt. And many of you, especially maybe those out on Facebook watching, maybe you grew up watching Walt on Sunday nights on the Disneyland or the Wonderful World of Disney show. He was a fixture in your living rooms on those small TVs that you might have had, those old-fashioned TVs. And for a generation, he became Uncle Walt. And even for someone like myself who, wasn't alive when he was, I remember seeing those reruns on the Disney Channel. So to get us started, I want all of us to hear a little bit of Walt.
All who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Here age relives fond memories of the past. And here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world.
So before we jump into Walt's life in Kansas City, I want to provide just a little bit about his background before he moved to Kansas City. His family moved around a little bit during his childhood and his formative years. First in Chicago, so you can see Walt and his little sister Ruth right outside their house in Chicago, and of course, any Disney fanatics or Disney trivia nuts will know the town of Marceline, Missouri. So we'll just touch on those places a little bit before we get in depth into his time in Kansas City. So Walter Elias Disney, he was born on December 5th, 1901. His father Elias and his mother Flora. He lived at 1249 Tripp Avenue in Chicago's Hermosa neighborhood. His mother, Flora, was of German descent, and his father, Elias, was of Irish, Canadian, and French descent, and was actually born in Canada. Walt was the fourth of 5 children. He had 3 older brothers, Herbert, Raymond, and Roy. All were pretty significantly older than him, and a younger sister named Ruth, who he was also very close with too. And his brother Roy, we'll talk a lot about him as well, and that influence that he had on Walt. So in Chicago, Walt lived there only just a couple of years. By 1906, the Disney family, they'd been in Chicago for 17 years, obviously, though Walt just 4 or 5. And Elias's father had done well as a carpenter, but he lacked business sense. And he seemed to always be getting involved in certain investments that kind of went bust. After all that work that Elias had, put in, not only had he failed to build a nest egg, but he was also in debt. So they ended up, not staying in Chicago. In later years, though, Walt would have very few recollections of Chicago of his early childhood. He was just too young when his family moved. So on February 10th, 1906, Elias sold the property to Walter Chamberlain, and they moved to Marceline. However, the house still stands. Having fallen into disrepair, Chicago, the city, attempted to designate the property as a historical landmark in 1991. The owner at the time fought that designation, and the person won, and it put the home at the risk of demolition. 2013, Dinah Benedin and Brent Young, they purchased the home, and they committed to turning it into a museum and a learning center. They knew how important this was to preserve. And in March of 2016, the Walt Disney Company pledged to donate $250,000 to what would become the Center for Early Childhood Creativity and Innovation at the Walt Disney birthplace. After 5 years of renovation, the home was actually restored to how it appeared in 1901 when Walt was born. And on December 5th of 2018, the location was officially rededicated with a number of special guests. This ribbon cutting ceremony included Roy P. Disney, Walt's great nephew, Chicago Bulls center Robin Lopez, who's known to be a Disney fanatic, and Mickey Mouse even came for this. So you can see a picture down in this bottom left corner of what the house looked like, back in the day when Walt would have been there, and what it looks like today, fully restored to its 1901 glory. So after Chicago, as I mentioned, Marceline, Missouri, not too far from where we are here in Topeka, but this little town would have a huge impact on Walt. So Walt, he lived there for only 5 years, between the ages of 4 and 9. Yet the influence of that time and place stayed with this man throughout his entire life. This was the place where Walt really developed his interest in drawing when he was paid to draw the horse of a retired neighborhood doctor. Just as a little kid, hey, he got a few bucks to draw a picture of a horse. And he would practice his drawing skills by copying the front page cartoons of the local newspaper. He also lived near the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railway line and became enamored with the trains and some of the people that he knew and relatives who would come by and show him the trains. And again, those who are familiar with Walt's life would know how influential trains became for him. So while he was in Marceline, Walt and his younger sister Ruth started school at the same time. They went to what was at the time the Park School in late 1909. So you can see Walt and Ruth in this kind of bottom right corner picture, and then you can see the Park School right next to it there. Although this is now longer in existence, the Walt Disney Elementary School is just about a half a mile away from where the park school once stood. The biggest thing for Walt and Marceline, it became really the idealized vision of his childhood. This is another recurring theme. Most of Walt's childhood consisted of him working to help support his family, really driven by his father. In terms of their personalities, Walt and Elias were polar opposites. Walt was more this creative free spirit. Elias was this driven pragmatist. When Walt would look back, Marceline was the time in his life when he could be around nature, when he could play in the forest, when he could take care of the farm animals, all things that we would see highly influence his career and his creative output. His time, as I said, really shaped those values. So wherever you look in Walt Disney's art, there are echoes of Marceline, from, the tremendous affection for small town, turn of the century life, to the boyhood experiences that were echoed and expanded in his animated cartoons. The most significant one, Main Street USA at Disneyland. You can see a picture here in the kind of this middle top, and actually one of the facades says Hotel Marceline there. And this was really inspired by the main street of the town. This picture on the top left was taken last year, kind of just before the pandemic hit, when I was able to visit there. Walt would return, though, to Marceline a couple of times. Probably the most significant was on Independence Day in 1956, and you can see a picture in the top right corner here of that. He had been invited to attend the dedication of the city's new park and pool. Before he agreed, he wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to be hit up for money, so they'd already paid for it, so he said, all right, that's fine, he'll come back then. More than 6,000 people turned out for the dedication of this pool. And also the film, The Great Locomotive Chase, starring Fess Parker, had its premiere at Marceline's Uptown Theater that day. And you can see this in the bottom, this bottom picture of Walt with Roy and some kids outside of that premiere. Also out of this trip would come the idea for the Marceline Project. This wasn't really a theme park like Disneyland, but it would be a turn-of-the-century rural experience built on the old Disney family farm. It would be a place for modern city kids to learn where their food came from and to experience the joys of country life. And although Walt passed away before this could be realized, this idea inspired different attractions at Disney parks. One that comes to mind is Living with the Land at Epcot, or the old Bountiful Farms section of Disney's California Adventure, or the unrealized theme park that would have won in Virginia in 1996, Disney's America. But Marceline did receive something, and it was a former Disneyland attraction. You can see in the bottom corner here, the Midget Autopia was very popular with younger guests at Disneyland. And when the area of the park that the attraction was located was being remodeled, Disney shipped the Autopia to Marceline as a gift to the children of that community. And in Marceline, they really keep that legacy of Walt alive. Of course, with Walt Disney Elementary School, but the Walt Disney Hometown Museum, which was established in 2001 to help celebrate the 100th birthday of Walt Disney. There's over 10,000 square feet of immersive gallery space, and it's focused on displaying the Ruth Disney Beecher collection, Walt's younger sister, her collection. Over her lifetime, she saved personal artifacts and family correspondence that shine a light on their close relationship and gives a valuable insight on the inspiration derived from their childhood home. In the museum, there are unique story stations that help tell the Disney's Marceline tale. Located on the first floor is the Collector's Gallery, which gives Disney fans from all over the world a rare opportunity to showcase their favorite Disney collectibles. It also has a mix of permanent installations surrounded by items on temporary loan. The second floor displays give a gentle nod to the overall theme of inspiration, where you can see a documentary inside the Sharon Disney Lund Education Center, pose for a picture on Walt's back porch, draw your favorite Disney character in the recreated park school classroom. So it's almost like being in Walt's school like he was, or walk through a miniature Disneyland built by artist Dale Varner. The upper gallery, which I found to be really interesting, shares stories of Walt's earliest jobs in Kansas City and his proposed park to be built on the Marceline farm. So definitely, if you're ever out that way, check out the Walt Disney Hometown Museum. All right, so although Walt loved farm life, the adults they didn't find it to be that idyllic. So as I mentioned, Elias Disney, his father, really didn't have much luck at commerce, and the farm was no exception. The animals got sick, drought fried out the soil, and blights affected the crops. And if the Disneys had a good apple harvest, well, so did everybody else, and prices plummeted. When Walt's two oldest brothers, Herbert and Raymond, they were both 17 and 15, left the farm, things took a turn for the worst. Elias really held a grudge, and he was really, really mad and upset with his sons for doing that. He felt that they betrayed the family, and that ability to hold a grudge, well, Walt would carry that later on into his life. Then Elias was stricken with typhoid that required hospitalization. When he returned home in the winter of 1910-1911, Flora urged him to sell the farm. So after Roy, Walt, and Ruth finished their school year at Park in the summer of 1911, the Disneys boarded a train and they were on their way to Kansas City. So Walt and the family, their first home was a rented house at 2706 East 31st Street. But after a couple of years, the Disneys then purchased a two-story home at 3028 Bellefontaine, only a few blocks away from the 31st Street address. And you can see that home right here in this picture to the left. Walt would tell the Kansas City Star in 1966, there were some tough kids around 31st and Troost, some of the Pendergrast and Costello gangs. We'd get into snowball and mudball fights with them, only they put rocks in their balls. So Walt's kind of fun childhood on the farm, well, when they moved to Kansas City, that would kind of be the end of it. At the age of 9, young Walt found himself being pulled from his bed every morning well before dawn. Even before he got his breakfast, he was expected to haul up to 25 or 30 pounds of newsprint through the neighborhood. He became a newsie, a paper boy, really as his first job. Elias purchased a newspaper delivery route for the Kansas City Star and Kansas City Times, in which Walt and Roy would wake up at 3:30 every morning to deliver the papers before school and in the evening after school. Boys were paid between $2.50 and $3 a week, but Roy and Walt were told by Elias that since this was the family business, they were working for their room and board, and determined to find success in his latest venture, Elias really laid down the law. Be no tossing of papers into yards or onto porches. Walt and Roy, they were expected to carry each paper up the customer's walk and, if possible, place it between the screen door and the front door. Paper couldn't be rolled or folded. Also, they had to remember which customers took only the Times, which only the Star, and which subscribed to both. More than a half century later, Disney told a journalist that he still had nightmares about the paper route, especially those mornings when there was heavy snow and he had to struggle through all that unshoveled drift to make his deliveries. However, even the time in Kansas City there, Walt would essentially be left as the only son of the Disneys. Shortly after graduating from high school in the spring of 1913, 19-year-old Roy told his brother that he was preparing to leave the family, especially their overbearing father. For 11-year-old Walt, this news was overwhelming. Roy, he was this sort of white knight to Walt's squire, this big brother who offered advice and protection, who would often serve as a buffer between Elias's wrath and little Walt. And you would see that relationship stayed through their whole lives, even after Walt's passing and the completion of Walt Disney World. So for most of his 6 years in Kansas City, Walt was in effect the only son of the Disney family, with Herbert, Raymond, and Roy all gone, although they stayed in contact with their mother, Flora. So where did Walt go to school? He and Ruth both attended Benton Grammar School, which was about 2 blocks west of the Disney home at 30th and Benton Boulevard. And despite being a voracious reader of Stevenson and Scott and Twain and Dickens, Walt wasn't that great of a student. He either was just exhausted from delivering papers, he was too wrapped up in his own creative dreams to pay much attention. Although Walt was friendly, he didn't have many close companions. As his classmate Nathan L. Basson said, Walt didn't socialize much because he was involved in drawing his cartoons. Most of us stayed around the school and played basketball, but Walt didn't. In reality, he was probably just too tired from all the working he had to do on that paper route. One school-related activity that made an impression on Walt, though, was his participation in the school track team, especially when he brought home a medal for a relay event. And I wish there were still some pictures of that around. Summer of 17, some things would change for the Disney family. By that spring, Elias had grown tired of the newspaper delivery business. He announced he was ready to return to Chicago, where he had spent $16,000 to purchase a partnership in the Ozell Jelly Factory. In addition to jelly, this company was producing a soft drink called Ozell, which Elias claimed would make the family a fortune. And there's actually a reproduction of this made at the Walt Disney birthplace museum in Chicago now. So Walt and Ruth, they graduated from Benton on June 8th of 1917, and Elias and Flora and Ruth headed to Chicago. But Walt stayed. He stayed behind in that summer in Kansas City to work a job. He still lived at the Bellefontaine home, but he now shared it with Roy, who was free to move back as soon as Elias was gone, as well as Herbert and his family. And Walt's summer job was for the Van Noy Interstate News Company. He would essentially go and sell candy and fruit and papers and whatever on the in the smoking car of the railroad of the trains. He was 15 years old, and he would ride the Missouri Pacific Railroad route between Kansas City and Jefferson City. And he'd pick up that hamper of fruit, candy, gum, soda, and cigars, and just set up shop in that in the smoking car up front. His travels took him as far east as Chicago and as far west as Pueblo, Colorado. When Walt rejoined his family in Chicago that fall, he'd seen some of the world. He'd tasted independence. And he didn't know it at the time, but within a year, he would embark on one of his greatest adventures. But before then, he spent, again, that year in Chicago. He was reunited with his family, but once again, he was towing Elias's line. But he had found an outlet for his art. He enrolled at Chicago's McKinley High School in the fall of 1917, and he quickly gravitated toward The Voice, which was the school magazine. And he started to draw cartoons. And many of them reflected current events in America, leading up to the First World War. He would only spend another year in Chicago, but he was determined to invest his time wisely. He enrolled in night courses at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. He did something similar at the Kansas City Art Institute as well, back when he was living there too in the future. And one of his teachers was Chicago Tribune artist Carrie Orr. And as biographer Bob Thomas wrote, Walt began assembling a gag file. He sat for hours in vaudeville houses, scribbling down jokes for cartoons. Walt compiled the jokes and tried out the best ones on his father. Elias listened to them without a smile. 2 days later, he would remark straight-faced to his son, "You know, I've been thinking about that joke you told me, Walter. It's funny, very funny." So, hey, there's two different personalities there. But what would lead Walt out of Chicago would be World War I. His brother Roy went to fight. He wanted to join the action. But realizing the war would be over by the time he graduated from high school, he began badgering his parents for permission to enlist. Elias and Flora, they weren't going to send their youngest son off to war. In mid-1918, he attempted to join the U.S. Army. He was rejected for being too young. He then tried to join the Canadian Army, since they took younger recruits, but this plan was thwarted by a friend's mother. So after forging the date of birth on his birth certificate, he joined the Red Cross in September of 1918 as an ambulance driver. And he was deployed to France, but he arrived in November after the armistice. He was stationed mostly in Paris, and he drove trucks and ambulances and also became a chauffeur for army officers. And he found American soldiers who would pay for his art. He drew sketches of his colleagues, and they purchased them and they would send them home. He also drew cartoons on the side of his ambulance for decoration, and had some of his work published in the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes. But when Walt returned home, he couldn't see himself back in high school. He could have gone almost anywhere, but he kept thinking of Kansas City. He knew the town and he had friends and family there, especially his brother Roy. Also, it was 500 miles away from Elias, who was trying to convince him to work at the jelly factory. So that was a pretty good incentive for him to head back to Kansas City. So when Walt came back to Kansas City, he had one goal in mind. His dream was to become an editorial cartoonist for the Kansas City Star. He was rejected by the Star for the position and also by the Kansas City Journal for other cartoon positions, but they saw some potential in him. Roy Disney, he was working at the First National Bank in Kansas City, and a couple of his customers, Louis Pessman and Bill Rubin, they needed an artist for their small commercial art studio in the Gray Advertising Building. So Walt got that job and he would do advertising layouts and letterheads for clients. And this was kind of that first step leading Walt to the man he would become. This was only kind of a short-term seasonal job, and he was laid off after only 6 weeks. But he met one of his lifelong friends and one of his closest partners in the animation business, Ub Iwerks there, who, would go on and really develop Mickey Mouse and go and be one of his leading animators all throughout his life. He also began to forge a strong relationship with a very important client, the Newman Theater. We'll talk about a little bit later. So after the layoff, Walt and Ub decided to start their own commercial art shop named Iwerks Disney. They were going to call it Disney Iwerks, but they figured that kind of sounds like an optometrist, so we'll switch the names. The office was located in the Mutual Building on the southeast corner of 13th and Oak, and this effort was also short-lived after Walt and Iwerks had answered an ad put in the paper by the Kansas City Slide Company. So during the silent film era, every city had a company that helped to serve the local theaters, and they would turn out what were called slides for the local merchants. So again, it's probably been a while since most of us have been to a movie theater, but we see movie theater, we see ads before the films, not the trailers, but the local ads. It's kind of a real early version of that. So A. Vern Cogger hired Walt and Ub, while Ub actually continued to run Iwerks Disney before he would come on later when a spot opened up. As the industry was changing, the company soon changed its name to the Kansas City Film Ad Company and moved to a new office at 2449 Charlotte Street. And the name change was significant because it reflected this growing sophistication of the movie-going experience. So in the past, film audiences had been accustomed to a pre-feature show of just still pictures and ads projected on a screen. Those were the slides, were there, just like, having those old-fashioned kind of slides there. But more and more local advertisers were actually commissioning little films to be screened in the theaters. And the Kansas City Film Ad Service was there to serve them. So Walt became very successful with this firm. He was earning about $60 a month, which was enough for him to dress well, to smoke good cigars, to eat at fancy restaurants, and he even had a social life. But really what made Walt stand out, he was not the best artist. He really became known for his humor that he was able to inject into otherwise kind of dull ads and the gags that he created. And his imagination is what made up for those shortcomings as a draftsman. So you can see a little picture here, and Walt is in the background. He's got a little pipe in his mouth there. So because of these little films and some of these drawings that were going on, Walt found himself in the animated movie business with Kansas City Film Ad. And he became fascinated with this animation process. And he would pester the animation staff. And Jimmy Lowry, he was the head of animation there, began coaching him on animation essentials. And Walt, he started going to the movies 5 times a week. And in terms of the cartoons he viewed, he was both fascinated and dissatisfied with them. And he was already convinced that he could do better himself. So, dying to try animating on his own, Walt begged Cogger until he finally gave him permission to borrow one of the firm's movie cameras on weekends. So with Roy, and most likely Ub, Walt cleared out the garage behind the Disney home and set up a very small, crude animation studio. And he wasn't limiting himself just to animation, as he shot footage of some of his friends and his relatives. One surviving piece of this footage is of his niece, his brother Herbert's daughter. She drops a bottle of milk which shatters on the ground, and then Walt projects the footage in reverse so that the bottle is reassembled and leaps back into the child's arms. Oh, I wish I had this clip of it because I've seen it before. And many of you might have seen it if you've ever been at Disney's Hollywood Studios and gone into the One Man's Dream Museum and watched the documentary at the end of the museum, where you can actually, in that film, see that clip, as well as his kind of a reverse of his mother catching a newspaper as well. So those are some of those early tricks that he filmed. So after a year at KC Film Ad, he was ready to put all he learned to use. And his new project that he came up with was called Laugh-O-Gram. And he would debut these at the Newman Theater. And you can see a picture of the Newman Theater there. So he pitched this idea to the manager of the theater on Main Street. His name was Milton Feld. And the idea was to make a short film combining live action and animated footage that would serve as a sort of moving version of a newspaper editorial cartoon. So what he loved, those cartoons, actually now combining it with his new love of animation. And it's pretty significant that the opening moments of this original test reel film weren't animated. Rather, they feature young Walt busy at work. So even as a young kid, if you want to say, he liked being in front of the camera, which would, be something of his going all the way throughout his career. So, y'all ready to see this? You want to see his, first Laugh-O-Gram, Newman's Laugh-O-Gram? Here it is. So that was Kansas City Spring Cleanup. It debuted on March 20th, 1921. And many believe that it is one of the few existing examples of animation done exclusively by Walt Disney, because most of his work was done in collaboration with others. And though Walt went on to make several of these Newman laughograms, only this original sample reel is known to still exist. Feld was impressed enough to contract for more of these laughograms, but also in the following months to have Walt create several other shorts for the theater. And this became a really nice side gig for Walt. However, the creation of his next short in the spring of 1922, Little Red Riding Hood, would cause him to actually quit his job at KC Ad Film and start his own studio. So I will show you here Little Red Riding Hood. And what this is known as a fractured fairy tale, which Walt would create a lot of these during his laughograms time. What a fractured fairy tale is it's a kind of a modern retelling or using kind of very loose basis of a fairy tale story. And again, reinterpreting it, changing characters, or putting it in a more modern setting. Rocky and Bullwinkle, that cartoon series, was very well known for fractured fairy tales. So in 1922, Walt signed a deal with the Tennessee branch of the Pictorial Clubs for the completion of 6 animated fairy tales for $11,000. So Laugh-O-Gram Films, the studio, was up and running. May 23rd, 1922, it was incorporated, and Walt rented a suite of offices on the second floor of the new McConaughey building at 31st and Forest, just down the street from the Isis Theater. The animators who worked on Little Red Riding Hood joined him. He hired someone to do ink drawings. He had a business manager, a salesman, and an administrative assistant. At the ripe age of 20, Walt Disney had his own film studio. And between April and November of 1922, the Laugh-O-Gram crew produced 5 more of these fractured fairy tales. The 4 musicians of Bremen, Jack and the Beanstalk, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, Puss in Boots, Cinderella, and some believe there is a 6th film known as Jack the Giant Killer. So here is the 4 musicians of Bremen. So the Laugh-O-Gram office, it was an exhilarating place to work. The president of the company was 20 years old. Many of his employees were still in their teens, and they shared his zest for the cartoon medium, often working past midnight. And Ub Iwerks would join Laugh-O-Gram in the fall of 1922, following that same pattern of working with Walt. Walt ran a pretty loose ship, and although each employee had an official title, the division of labor was highly informal. However, he would start to have some financial troubles. And this trouble struck when the Tennessee branch of the pictorial clubs went out of business. And goodbye went that $11,000 they were supposed to get. So to make ends meet, he added the feature of photographing youngsters for parents, being a newsreel stringer for big Hollywood outfits, and returning to some advertising ventures. A much needed $500 came in December of 1922 with an order for a dental hygiene film. It was known as Tommy Tucker's Tooth, and it was mostly live action. It was an instructional film commissioned by a local dentist. Then Walt would have another modest success in the early spring of 1923. His crew made what today we would actually call a music video. And Walt directed and produced a live action film called A Songo Reel to accompany the performance of a popular tune by Joe Sanders, Martha, just a plain old fashioned name. But there was no sound. Those ones that we've been watching, all of that sound has been added later there. Everything, of course, we weren't too sound in film yet. So where did the music actually come from? Well, at the Isis Theater, where this debuted, which was on 31st and Truce Avenue, around the corner from the Laugh-O-Gram office, the theater organist was a man by the name of Carl Stalling. He played the tune while the audience was encouraged to sing along. Carl Stalling would later become the first musical director for the Disney studio. He would help create the Silly Symphonies series, and then would work as the musical director for Warner Brothers Animation for a long, long time. Walt hoped that this first Songo Reel would be the start of a new and successful series, but it wasn't meant to be. No Prince of Martha exists today, and all that remains to tell the story of the lone Songo Reel are, according to historians Russell Merritt and J.B. Kaufman, a handful of stills, title card by Iwerks, and eyewitness accounts. Walt would then enter what he called the darkest period of his life, camping out at the Laugh-O-Gram office, sleeping on the floor, shaving in the restroom down the hall, and once a week, investing a dime in the public baths at Union Station. Although the end of Laugh-O-Gram seemed to be in plain sight, Walt had one more trick up his sleeve. He wrote a letter to Margaret J. Winkler. She was a New Yorker who distributed the popular Out of the Inkwell animated series by Max Fleischer. Walt pitched his idea to take a human character, in this case, a little girl, and move her through a cartoon environment. And the name of this girl would be Alice. The Out of the Inkwell series had done the reverse for quite some time. He wanted to, flip it on its head and do something different. This was the most ambitious project that Laugh-O-Gram had yet undertaken, and practically suicidal when one considers the studio's financial situation. But Walt believed that Alice would propel him to the big time. But progress on the short was slow. By early July 1923, it was clear that Laugh-O-Gram was not going to make it. Alice, it wasn't finished. The company treasury was empty, and almost all the staff had taken other jobs. So Walt ended up declaring bankruptcy, and Laugh-O-Gram went out of business. And by the time it was settled, more than a year later, Laugh-O-Gram's creditors received 45% of their claims, and the stockholders were out of luck. But obviously, that was not the end for Walt. Walt left Kansas City in July. He was wearing a checkered coat and unmatching pants. He had $40 in cash, and his imitation leather suitcase contained only a shirt, 2 pairs of underwear, 2 pairs of socks, and some drawing materials. When he paid for his fare trip to California, he bought a first-class ticket. Out there, he was reunited with his brother Roy, and Walt's luck began to turn around. Having finally been able to complete Alice's Wonderland, Walt struck a deal with Margaret Winkler. Her studio, Winkler Pictures, needed a quick replacement for their centerpiece, Felix the Cat, animated series and ordered Walt's Alice comedies to serve. So this series, Walt directed and produced all 57 films, and he started to have some success there. With funding secured with the Alice deal, on October 16th, 1923, Walt and Roy created the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio in Los Angeles. Walt convinced Ub Iwerks to join the studio, and more artists who Walt had worked with in Kansas City joined the studio. Roy really ushered in that business structure to the new venture that lacked at Laugh-O-Gram Films. By 1926, Winkler's role in the distribution of the Alice series had been handed over to her husband, the film producer Charles Mintz. The Alice series ran until about July 1927, by which time Walt had begun to tire of it. He wanted to move away from the mixed format and go to all animation. Mintz requested new material to distribute through Universal Pictures, so Disney and Iwerks created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which you can see to the right here, a poster for it. That proved to be a success for both Walt and for Mintz. Walt, he was a hard-driving boss. He came down pretty tough on his employees, and many of his old Kansas City animators were starting to become disgruntled with him. Seeing an opportunity, Mintz began to secretly hire away many of Walt's artists. Iwerks informed Walt of this, and he was caught off guard, very much so. So on a trip to New York to renegotiate his contract with Mintz, Mintz revealed that he had indeed persuaded many of the artists involved to work directly for him. He also revealed that Universal owned the intellectual property rights to Oswald, threatening Disney that he would start his own studio and produce the series himself if Disney refused to accept lesser terms than what Walt had originally been working under. Walt declined Mintz's ultimatum and lost most of his animation staff, except Iwerks, who chose to remain with him. Gone was Oswald, gone was the distributor, gone was the team, and most of his money with it. So on his way back to Los Angeles from New York, Walt stopped in Marceline to clear his mind. And he thought back to a little mouse who lived in a drawer of his desk at the Laugh-O-Gram studio. And the rest is history, as Mickey Mouse would be born. So, some of it might sound kind of gloomy, Walt's time in Kansas City, but it wasn't. He enjoyed his time very much, and he would return quite a bit. And even though he was a resident of California his whole life, he did visit on many occasions. Few of these were related to the Legion of Honor of the Order of Desmarais, you can see on the left there. And Walt is also credited with creating the first incarnation of the University of Missouri Kansas City's mascot. In April of 1937, a group of enterprising students debuted a humor magazine, which they titled The Kangaroo. The cover, the one drawn by Walt Disney himself featuring Mickey Mouse shaking hands with a kangaroo, proved to be extremely popular, which would make sense if you had, by that time of 1937, Mickey Mouse was established, Silly Symphonies and Snow White would be debuting in December. So that, Walt was definitely, on his way at that point. So the way the students got this is, Walt was visiting Kansas City and they contacted him. They asked for a drawing and he obliged and he gave it to them. And you can still now find throwback merchandise. And I actually have a t-shirt too of this design of the UMKC kangaroo with that, in Walt's design there. In 1963, he received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Kansas City Art Institute, and his final trip to Kansas City was in October of 1966, 2 months before his passing. Along with former President Dwight D. Eisenhower and comedy legend Bob Hope, Walt was honored at a national meeting of People to People, a service organization based in KC. Disney was honored for his service on behalf of the People to People program and for advancing the cause of international understanding and friendship through personal diplomacy. So with all of that rich history in Kansas City, what's left? Where are those landmarks? Well, there is an organization known as Thank You Walt Disney Incorporated. They're committed to saving Walt Disney's Kansas City history and providing a place for art and animation study, while also encouraging confidence and entrepreneurial individualism. The efforts to restore the Laugh-O-Gram studio represent more than just a fascination with Walt Disney and his incredible life. but also represents the opportunity to preserve a part of history that would have otherwise disappeared and ultimately serve as a catalyst to link education and hope with youth, enabling them to become true leaders in the community. This organization first started in 1995 after a visit from Walt's daughter, Diane, and her husband, Ron Miller. And they wanted to come up with a way to preserve this building. And at one point, actually, Hallmark Cards entered into a discussion with the Walt Disney Company about a cooperative undertaking. But eventually, those discussions ended with a mutual agreement to put the project aside. And even with donations from a number of individuals, corporations, and estates, thank you, Walt Disney has had a bit of a hard time making the plans a reality. And really, probably one of the things to really hurt that was when the Walt Disney Family Museum went to San Francisco and not to Kansas City there. But there's still hope. There's still a plan for the building. Have a number of different ventures that they want to put into this building. College classroom, professional training and animation camp, an outdoor theater and gathering space, retail space, a coffee shop, an interactive museum, a recreation of the 1922 Laugh-O-Gram studio, and a Disney Kansas City tour headquarters. If you check out the Thank You Walt Disney website, they'll have some of the key landmarks in Walt Disney's past, some of the buildings that still exist and some that don't. A couple of weeks ago, I went and toured to find a lot of these different landmarks. So this is the Laugh-O-Gram studio building today. It's at 1127 East 31st Street. Looks to be, in a bit of rough shape. But when I was there, I could hear people working and renovating, and I could see them in there building it up. So that made me very, very happy to see that work is being done on this historic building. The grammar school that Walt went to, still there. It became known as the D.A. Holmes School, and it closed as a school in 1997, but is now the D.A. Holmes Senior Apartments. The Isis Theater, that building is no longer there, nor is the Newman Theater building, but we're near where the Isis stood. You can see a mural, of a drawing of Mickey Mouse as the Isis Theater and a portrait of Walt. About 3100 Troost Avenue, you'll find that. And then Walt's childhood home at 3028 Bellefontaine Avenue is still there. And it's been owned by a family for about 3 generations now. They love to sit outside and to wave to people and to talk to them. Everyone who comes by, you can see little Mickey Mouse sign at the top, some garden decorations as well. This is Flo. Her mother owns the house, but she was very, very nice when I came to visit. She showed me, she had like laminated documents showing the ownership and the proof of Walt's residency and, her family buying this. Also a book that the Walt Disney Company had sent to her. So it's good to know that this building still stands there. So my hope someday is that all of these landmarks definitely are preserved, and Walt's grandson has that same feeling as well. As he said, this is a part of history that can't be replaced. This building was the start of an amazing career and legacy. Walt was in Kansas City when everyone else in animation was in New York. What he started in that little building became the greatest animation studio ever. And really what Kansas City represents is truly that can-do attitude that Walt had, because he was knocked down a number of times, but he kept getting back up. And a great quote from his, laughter is timeless, imagination has no age, and dreams are forever. And he really showed that throughout his time, not just in Kansas City, but throughout his entire life. But to finish up this workshop, let's hear it in his own words.
I get tired just watching the kids dance.
Good night, Mr. Disney.
Good night, kids. Oh, we'll be 30 years younger. I don't know about you folks, but it's way past my bedtime. The morning comes around early, and that's one of my favorite times here, too. So, good night.
Great. Thank you very much for everyone who has joined in. Anybody have any questions or anything else they'd like to discuss about Walt's time in Kansas City? Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the festival. And we'll see you at some of the other panels and workshops and film showings.
There were a couple
Oh.
questions on the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me see in the chat here.
I posted them over from Facebook and the other stream places.
Oh, I see him. Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right. Yes, definitely. Walt Disney lives where we are. What? Basically every kid. Exactly. Yep. Okay. So, well, I didn't have Steamboat Willie since that came a little bit later, past his time in Kansas City, but yeah, definitely very first, really considered the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. So great.
Well, wonderful. Let's give Dr. Anglin a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
We will we'll be broadcasting from Arts Connect here a little bit later, and I'll have some other stuff for you before then. Thank you very much for watching. Thank
Yep,
you,
thank
Dr.
you,
Anglin,
everybody.
for doing such a great presentation.
No problem.
It was
Thank you.
awesome.